Well, good evening. Thank you for tuning in to Lesson of the Vietnam Show. Here we strive to tell the real story of the Vietnam War and the men and women who fought it. It's important to us to dispel the myths, the mistruths, and the misunderstandings of the war and its participants. I am Bill Dixon, Vietnam veteran, 67, 68, TET survivor, and your host for the show. We broadcast from the Raleigh, North Carolina studios of Nissan Communications, who give us this opportunity to tell the real story of the Vietnam War. And I might suggest that sometime you come back on and see some of his other shows. I know they're not, they pale compared to mine, but go ahead and come back and see some of the other shows. You're welcome doing the show and encouraged to participate with your host. And if we had a guest, we don't have a guest tonight. We have a special show. It's called Deserters and Others. You see there on the screen the telephone numbers and the Skype address. So call in, ask questions. Anytime you catch me in saying something that's not true, let me know, please, because the whole idea is to let you know all the information that's truth and so forth out there. So let me know if I'm off somewhere along the line, because I want to make sure that we get the true story out there. There's enough misfacts out there without your host doing it, and sometimes it's a challenge. As you see on the screen there, the Veterans Crisis Lines, we always say 22 veterans a day is entirely too many men and women who serve this country who give it up because they can't handle what's coming at them. It's tough. I go to group meetings myself, and if you know someone that's in that situation, please refer them to this telephone number and have them call. There's some good people out there waiting to help. Again, our show tonight is the Deserters and Others, and I'll explain to you in a little bit as we go along exactly what I mean by others. The first part, is Vietnam War is Deserters and Others. Okay, I don't know what exactly happened to that. My slide, it looks like it slid offline. There we go. Aha, I got fancy on it. Okay. Sometimes I try tricks and I forget to tell Amnon that I've tried those tricks, but it's a time of Vietnam desertion. So I fool myself sometimes because I try to do some of these in advance. All right, let's keep right on moving along. And let's see. AWOL, that's a good one. Exactly what is AWOL? Absent without leave. Okay. Now, we still got the same child. Okay. Now, I only did that on one. AWOL and UA. Okay. I didn't get that creative. It got creative on itself. AWOL and UA are one of the same. If you're in the Marines, it's UA, unauthorized absence. AWOL in the United States Army and military personnel will become AWOL, absent without leave. If absent, they're posted without a valid pass or leave. The United States Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard call these personnel as unauthorized absence or UA. Okay. That's only for a short period of time. These personnel are dropped from their unit roles after 30 days and then listed as deserters. However, as a matter of U.S. military law, desertion is not measured by time away from the unit, which kind of comprehends what they just said. But anyway, all right. Aha, missing movement. This is another term used to describe where members of the armed forces fail to arrive at the appointed time to deploy or move out. In other words, if you were supposed to go catch your ship to go to Vietnam or catch the plane to go to Vietnam and you didn't show up, you missed that movement. It's not the other kind of movement that you don't want to miss either. In the United States Armed Forces, this is a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. We call it the UCMJ. The offense is similar to absent without leave, but may draw more severe punishment. What are they going to do? Send you to Vietnam? That's what we always used to say. Failure to repair. Now, some of these I hadn't really heard about myself as I was going through the service. Missing a formation or failing to appear at an assigned place and time when so ordered. It is a lesser offense within Article 86 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Now, I did have a problem when I was in Vietnam. The first couple of days, I did fail to repair because they put me in a tent all by myself with the cooks, and I didn't have to get out and stand formation and so forth. Okay, here we go again with that tricks here. Desertion. The United States Uniform Code of Military Justice defines desertion as any member of the armed forces who, without authority goes or remains absent from his unit, organization, or place of duty with intent to remain away therefrom permanently. Number 2, quits his unit, organization, or place of duty with intent to avoid hazardous duty or to shirk important service. Or without being regularly separated from one of the armed forces, enlists or accepts an appointment in the same or other one of the armed forces without fully disclosing the fact that he has not been regularly separated, or enters any foreign armed services except when authorized by the United States, is guilty of desertion. In other words, if you're a member of the U.S. Army and you joined the French Foreign Legion, you have deserted. Okay, and that's a famous young man of today, Rugdahl, who has just been charged with desertion and got off pretty light on that as far as I'm concerned, but that's just my opinion. Okay, desertion part 2. Any commissioned officer of the armed forces who, after tender of his resignation and before notice of his acceptance, quits his post or proper duties without leave and with intent to remain away therefrom permanently is guilty of desertion. In other words, if you're an officer and you decide to quit, you can't quit until they tell you that you can quit. And if you quit beforehand, you're a deserter. Okay? Now, any person found guilty of desertion or attempt to desert shall be punished if the offense is committed in a time of war, by death, or such other punishment as a court-martial may direct. But if the desertion or attempt to desert occurs at any other time by such a punishment other than death as a court-martial may direct. In other words, it's not a time of war, the court-martial can decide that you don't get killed. But I'm going to tell you a little secret as we go along on that one, okay? Now, in the United States, before the Civil War, deserters from the Army were flogged. After 1861, tattoos or branding were also used. The maximum U.S. penalty for desertion in wartime remains death. All this punishment was last applied to Eddie Slovic. He was a United States Army soldier during World War II and the only American soldier to be court-martialed in 1945 and executed for desertion since the American Civil War. No serviceman has received more than 24 months imprisonment for desertion or missing movements post September 11, 2001. No deserter has served more than 2 years for desertion since September 11, 2001. Okay, so that kind of throws out that hanging offense out the window, doesn't it? What is the meaning of treason? Now, you're going to find as I go through this and give you some of the meanings and so forth, it's going to be hard to tell what's treason, what's sedition, and what's desertion. But I'm going to try to it anyway. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them. In other words, you don't commit treason unless you start a war against the United States, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Okay. In other words, if you're still in the military and you go over to Vietnam and you see the people in North Vietnam while the war's still going on and you still have a commissioned officer in the United States Navy, then you are committing treason. Okay. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. In other words, 2 people can come forward and say, yes, he's guilty of treason, or you get up on and make an idiot out of yourself and say, yeah, I did it. Okay. And I know several people that fit in that category today. Whoever owing allegiance to the United States levies war against them or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere is guilty of treason, and shall suffer death or shall be imprisoned not less than 5 years and fined under this title, but not less than $10,000, and shall be incapable of holding any office under United States laws. Let's see. Who can we think of that has had that problem? Let's see. Jane Fonda, she wouldn't, but she didn't run for office, but she's guilty of according to this, Joan Baez, Donald Sutherland, and somebody that was just Secretary of State and also was a senator on the name of John Kerry. John Kerry went to Vietnam and talked to North Vietnamese while he was still an officer of the United States government. But it says here, shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States laws. Oh, well, I guess the laws don't fit everybody. All right, let's see. Most states have treason provisions in their constitution or statutes. In other words, the federal government has treason laws, and so do the states. However, Congress has passed laws creating related offenses that punish conduct that undermines the government or the national security, such as sedition. In the 1798 Alien and Sedition Act, that was a little bit before my time, or espionage and sedition in the Espionage Act of 1917, which was also before my time, or espionage and sedition Act of 1917, which do not require the testimony of two witnesses. In other words, they just took treason and changed the name of it to sedition because you don't have to have those two people. Witness and have a much broader definition than Article 3 treason. Some of these laws are still in effect. Some well-known spies have been convicted of espionage rather than treason. You just got to know which one you're going to charge them with, I guess, okay? All right. Sedition is a crime of revolting or inciting revolt against the government. However, of the broad protection of free speech in the First Amendment, prosecutions for sedition are rare. So we got that old First Amendment rights thing, it gets in the way there. You know, it's amazing when the rights get in the way of things like that. Espionage. Espionage is generally a person may be punished for sedition only when he or she makes statements that create a clear and present danger to rights that the government may lawfully protect. Okay. Figure out the difference between sedition and espionage and write me a 2-page article on it. Okay. Desertion, sedition, treason. Everybody in school learns all about Benedict Arnold. One of the America's history's most notorious traitors is Benedict Arnold, whose name is considered synonymous with the definition of traitor due to his collaboration with the British during the American Revolutionary War. Of course, he spent all of his personal money trying to build his troops up, so he went broke. But however, it's amazing how everything has a however. However, this occurred before the Constitution was written. Arnold became a general in the British Army, which protected him. In other words, he was never, ever tried for being a deserter or a seditionist or treason because it wasn't in the Constitution at the time. So he broke the law before it was a law. So I guess that's why he didn't get arrested or whatever, but he's not the kind of guy you'd want to invite home for dinner, I guess. Okay. Since the Constitution came into effect, there have been fewer than 40 federal prosecutions for treason and even fewer convictions. Several men were convicted of treason in connection with the 1794 Whiskey Rebellion, but was pardoned by President George Washington. Okay, so there had been a whole lot going on as far as these problems since George Washington was here. Now, this is an article by Philip Giraldi, Vietnam War and Vietnam era desertions. During the Vietnam War, nearly 420,000 soldiers deserted, which means that they left their posts without intent to return or failed to show up for deployment. And this does not say whether they ever came back or whatever. It just says that there was 420,000. Considering there was right at 3 million that served, I guess 420,000 is not that many, but it just sounds like a whole lot to me. Those who were gone for more than a month were administratively categorized as having deserted. Okay. Now, how does the military keep up with all this? They've got men leaving one place and going to another and so forth. And okay, let's see if we can figure out how that works. Oh, by the way, this is Vung Tau Market. This was Vung Tau on the coast in 1968. there was places in Saigon and all the big cities and so forth, and you could easily get lost in. Some were caught, some were able to change their names and keep a low profile to avoid attention in the United States, while still others disappeared into the black market economy of Southeast Asia, sometimes selling drugs and weapons. I know when I first got there, I'm going, where in the world would you desert to over here? But as you got to know the people and things were going on, it was not that hard for an American soldier in the big cities to disappear, as they may have done in the Bungtown market, right, beautiful beaches and so forth, that the Viet Cong as well as the Americans used at the same time. Okay. Some were caught, were tried, but most were dealt with administratively. None were executed. They sure made it think that we were going to be hung and shot and everything else if we deserted, but none were ever executed. Over the course of the Vietnam War, the United States Army stockade at Long Binh, or LBJ, Long Binh Jail, we used to call it LBJ, and the Marine brig in Da Nang incarcerated thousands of U.S. military personnel. And I can tell you, you did not want to be there. But there was some penalties that weren't all that bad that they made people to go there for. This is an aerial view of Long Binh Jail, LBJ. Let's see, if you see that road on the other side, just about at the top of the picture, on the, a little bit farther there, that's about where my company was, just right up the road there. In fact, I took a picture of the fence around LBJ because it said don't take pictures. Crimes varied from more than minor offenses, refusing a haircut. I can't imagine going to LBJ because you didn't want to get a haircut. Smoking marijuana, significant acts of military disobedience, refusing military orders, going AWOL, to seriously violent felons, murder and rape. But then it turns back around and says, these convicted of felonies requiring sentences of less than a year. I guess if you were waiting to be on trial for murder or rape, you would be there. But if you're going to be there more than a year, I guess they would send you out someplace. When we come under attack, rocket attacks, the Long Binh Jail lights didn't go out. There's some of the tents and so forth. They lived in those hot tents, heavy canvas and so forth, want a whole lot of air. But that's some of the fence and the barbed wire around Long Binh Jail. And the problem was, like everything else, it was overcrowded. Long Binh Jail was built to hold around 400 men. By mid-1968, when I was there, it held over 700 inmates. The Marine brig was built to accommodate 200 inmates, and then in August 1968, it housed nearly 300. Sometime in the latter part of 68, they rioted. The prisoners in LBJ rioted, and a lot of them were killed, and during the riots and so forth, they burned things. Now let's just talk about some of the ways that you could get out of the draft, so you didn't have to worry about deserting. Draft avoidance and draft dodgers. One type of draft avoidance consists of attempting to follow the letter and spirit of the law, the draft laws, in order to obtain a legally valid draft deferment or exemption. Say you could avoid the draft and not break the law. I avoided the draft for a little while because of a college deferment. Sometimes these deferments and exemptions are prompted by political considerations. It goes all back down to who you know sometimes. Other type consists of attempts to circumvent, manipulate, or violate the substance or spirit of the draft laws in order to obtain a deferment or exemption. Now we're going to talk about a little bit all those, but some were okay, and some of them were frowned upon. Okay. Getting out of the draft by adhering to the law. This is a notice of clarification for a 1A, 4A, whatever you were. You could claim conscientious objector status on the basis of sincerely held religious or ethical beliefs. In other words, if you were strongly and could prove that you did not believe in killing people, or the Quakers and so forth fit in that. Claiming a student deferment when one is in school primarily in order to study and learn. That's a funny one. We all went to school to study and learn. It just as some of us didn't study and learn enough, and our grades went bad, and we were kicked out. So, but if you legit and stayed in school, then you got your deferment. Claiming a medical or psychological problem. If reported health issue is genuine and serious. Let's see, there was one guy got out because of a bad ankle or something. They sometimes, depending on who you were and so forth, you could get out. Sometimes people who had visual impaired or whatever could get out without a whole lot of problem. Holding a job, what the government considers to be an essential civilian occupation. In other words, if your job was very important to the war effort and taking you out of that job would hurt the war effort, then you could get out of it. So that's some of the ones that you can get by legally and get out of. Now, not being chosen in the draft or draft lottery, where lottery is determined in order to call to military service, or not being in a certain age group when age determines the order of call. I don't remember. I think it was like 37 or something like that. If you made it that far and didn't get a call, they probably weren't going to call you. Back when I went in, there was still a draft. When they switched over in '69 to the lottery, if your lottery number was 360, there's probably a good chance that you won't gonna go. So you can get a school deferment, as we've already talked about. Having a family member already serving in Vietnam, if you had a brother or sister, I guess, serving in Vietnam, there's a chance that you could get deferred because of they didn't want to make sure they didn't lose two people from the same family if possible. Claiming economic hardship, if the hardship is genuine and the military recognizes such a claim. If you're the sole breadwinner and you have a family member that's ill or whatever, and you need to stay back here to look after the family and so forth, then you could get an economic hardship. That is a order to report card. In other words, that person right there was found 1A prime beef and ready to go. So, but those are some of the ways you could get out. Let's talk about some of the ways that you could get out, but still be, well, it would be kind of fudging the issue there. I think this top one here is really humorous to me. People smoke ink-dipped cigarettes to fake tuberculosis. I've never heard of that one before. I guess it left spots on your lungs. Now, when I went through the induction center downtown Raleigh, there's a guy in front of me that had on mascara and makeup, and we stripped down to underwear. He had on, let's see if I get it right, it was blue panties with pink lace on them. He got the fast track, I think, because they pulled him out of line. But obtaining, one of the ways you could do it unlawfully was obtaining conscientious objector status by professing insincere religious or ethical beliefs. In other words, you suddenly joined some church that nobody ever heard of and said that they didn't allow you to go off to war or whatever. Obtaining a student deferment. If the student wishes to attend or remain in school largely to avoid the draft. I would say, be honest with you, I would think that almost everybody who had a school deferment remained in school largely to avoid the draft. Okay, how are you going to prove that other than keep your grades up, which I failed to do? Claiming a medical or psychological problem. If the purported problem is feigned, overstated, or self-inflicted. In other words, if you shot yourself in the foot before you got there, they probably are going to go and kind of speed you up. I have a friend of mine who took some medication to make his blood pressure go up, and he got to basic training and passed out, and he found out that he had low blood pressure and wouldn't have been into the service, but he took the medication that made his blood pressure go up. He thought it would have too high blood pressure and it wouldn't take him, but what it did was made him available to go into the draft. So it didn't always work, and I don't think that the guy who used the blue panties and the pink lace, I don't think he got out either. Finding a doctor who would certify a health draft age person as medically unfit, either willingly or for pay. And I think there's a lot of some of the wealthy people who got out that way. All kinds of weird things are going on. Draft card burning. Falsely claiming to be a homosexual when the military excluded homosexuals, which was back during the Vietnam War. And I guess that was what the guy with the mascara and makeup on and the blue panties and the pink lace was trying to do. And it worked for a while there, but I'm not certain what happened after that. Claiming economic hardship if the purported hardship is overstated. In other words, if you claim that your mom and daddy were going to starve to death, or you had a little brother or whatever, and they were going to starve to death if you didn't stay home and work for them, and you hadn't had a job in a year, they probably would frown upon that one. Deliberately failing one's military-related intelligence test. That worked all right for some people, but then McNamara coming along with his McNamara's Follies, where he would take you if you could fog a mirror in '68. So that one was kind of done away with. Becoming a missionary for a non-pacifist church, and then obtaining a deferment as a divinity student. In other words, you suddenly became a missionary for one of those weird churches out there. All ways to people to beat the draft. Now, a lot of people were burning their draft cards, okay, and failing to report. Now, they didn't desert, they just didn't report and so forth. By the end of 1969, there were 34,000 draft dodgers wanted by the police. Okay, raiding draft board offices and burning records with other form of protesting. In other words, what they would do before they found that the police found out they were deserted, they go to their draft board and set fire to it, the record, so that they wouldn't know, their record wouldn't been there. So as you can see there, there's a Maxwell House coffee can, and the guys are burning their draft card and putting it in the can there. Okay. Having someone exert personal influence on an officer in charge of the draft process. Now, back when I went in during the draft, not the lottery, because it didn't work that way with the lottery, if your daddy knew the right people and at the draft board, he might get you out of it, or at least get you delayed, probably out of it. Successfully bribing an officer in charge of the draft process, which is kind of like the one right up there on the top. I guess the one up on top, you say, I'm going to beat the living, you know what, out of you if you draft my son. And the second one is, I'm going to give you all this money if you don't draft my son. Not intending induction, physical, and hiding out in the country and with like-minded people. In other words, instead of going down to the induction center to get your physical and so forth, you hide out. Going to another country and seeking asylum. There was a lot of that. The one we know of mostly is Canada, and I've heard all kinds of different numbers. The one here says, as the United States opposition to war in Vietnam was a defining issue for youth counterculture in Canada. At least 20,000 draft dodgers and 12,000 deserters came to Canada for refuge. Although Canada was not at war with Vietnam, it did support the U.S. in a number of ways. 10,000 Canadians came to the United States and joined and went to Vietnam. The herbicide Agent Orange was tested in New Brunswick. Well, we sure punished them for taking out deserters. American bombers practiced carpet bombing in Alberta and Saskatchewan. But you know, when it was all over with and President Jimmy Carter pardoned the draft dodgers in 1977, many returned to the United States, but others stayed in Canada permanently. I guess Canada deserved them, okay? Estimates vary greatly as to how many Americans settled in Canada for the specific reason of dodging the draft as opposed to desertion or other reasons. Canadian immigration statistics show that 20 to 30,000 draft-eligible American men went to Canada as immigrants during the Vietnam era. Now, Canada back then had the same problem with immigrants I guess we're having. The BBC stated that many as 60,000 young American men dodged the draft, estimated the total number of American citizens who moved to Canada due to their opposition to the war ranging from 50 to 125,000. Another estimate says an estimated 70,000 draft invaders and dodgers were living in Canada by 1972, and they did go to other foreign countries and so forth, okay? Now, when they first got there, there was assistance from a Student Union for Peace Action Group, a campus-based Canadian anti-war group with connections to the Students for a Democratic Society. They would meeting the draft dodgers and deserters there and showing them what to do to get their citizenship with Canada and how to continue to draft, avoiding the draft. Canadian immigration policy at the time made it easy for immigrants from all countries to obtain legal status in Canada. By late 1967, draft dodgers were being assisted primarily by several Canadian-based anti-draft groups, over 20 of them, helping them soldiers and draft dodgers get settled into. Now, September 16th, 1974, there was a conditional amnesty for Vietnam draft dodgers. President Ford, who's well known for giving amnesty to Richard Nixon, but he also offered a conditional amnesty to Vietnam military deserters and draft dodgers who fled the country. Ford stated that he hoped that the amnesty would finally heal the deep national division the war had caused, which is the same thing he used for pardoning Nixon. Many who had served in Vietnam or who had lost loved ones were outraged. Hundreds of veterans sent President Ford medals earned in Vietnam and previous wars in gifts of protest for him giving them even a conditional pardon. Okay. Now let's talk about a couple famous. Bruce Springsteen. I was a stone cold draft dodger. Bruce Springsteen said, writing his song, Born in the USA, which everybody loves to sing and stand patriotic, helped him cope with his mixed feelings about dodging the draft during the Vietnam War. So it's okay if you write a song. You can draft, if any of you out there were draft dodgers and you want to come back, you haven't been able to come back, write a good song that everybody can sing and you can come back and everything's fine. I had some friends, very close friends of mine, guys who came home in wheelchairs and then I didn't go. Well, we all who went know people who came home in wheelchairs and legs and didn't come home at all. Cassius Clay, which most of y'all out there probably knew by Muhammad Ali. Clay stood up and said he was not going to be drafted. He was probably at his peak of time. He got 5 years probation and $10,000 fine that took his championship away from him. And many of the political leaders and academics of today were able to be draft dodgers. A lot of the people who are serving our country today as congressmen and other fields like that, and teaching our students, were all draft dodgers who now are able to sit down and tell the students how they saved the American nation because they were a draft dodger. Okay. They never talk about how they treated us when they came back, but all right. Another cracked history here is on January 21st, 1977, newly inaugurated President Jimmy Carter created perhaps the biggest controversy of his presidency by pardoning Vietnam War era draft evaders. In other words, Jimmy Carter would pardon anybody, anything. He gave away the Panama Canal, but that's another story. Many deserters were bitter that President Carter's 1977 amnesty program offered them less than honorable discharges. They were lucky they didn't get shot, and they were mad because they got less than honorable discharges. So they were mad with him. I'm surprised. I was really surprised he went that far. Okay. Now let's talk about some deserters. Marine PFC Robert Garwood. That's a picture of Garwood just about the time he was going on trial. Now, we did a show, and if you didn't see it, you might want to go back and look at it. I have a hard time believing Garwood was a deserter. Garwood had 10 days left in Vietnam before he got the big bird and went home, back to the world. I can't imagine a guy deserting with 10 days left. Now, according to all reports in the show, he went to see his girlfriend. And his girlfriend might have been a Viet Cong or working with the Viet Cong, and she knew he was going home in 10 days, and she turned him in, and that's how they got him. But as far as a deserter, it's kind of I just have a hard time picking out the fact that he was a deserter. But he was tried for other things as well. Okay. In Los Angeles, in March 1979, Marine PFC Robert Garwood emerged from 14 years of captivity in Vietnam. He traded 10 days for 14 years, an unwelcome symbol of a conflict that still haunts many Americans. His appearances caused an uproar. See, everybody was saying, hey, all the Americans have come home. All the POWs have come home. All other non-American POWs have been released 6 years before. Might there still be more? I think Chuck Norris made a movie or two about that, and I think a guy by the name of Rocky Stallone and Rambo made a couple of movies there. That's Garwood there in the middle. By far from hailing him as a returning hero, the Marine Corps court-martialed Garwood for allegedly collaborating with the enemy, desertion, assault on a fellow prisoner, and other charges. They basically proved collaborating. They got him for assaulting a fellow prisoner, which was kind of weak. And he just kind of pushed the guy in the chest a little bit and said, why did you let him beat this other American to death? And some other charges. But he did carry a rifle, which he said it was empty, around to kind of make the other prisoners do what they were told and so forth. But he was also told by a high-ranking American officer to do whatever you had to do to stay alive during that period of time. But he came home, and that's created a lot of more questions, okay? Nearly 24 ex-prisoners of war testified that Garwood had gone native. I mean, he had. Becoming an officer in the North Vietnamese army, carrying a rifle, living with his captors, coming and going as he pleased, and guarding his fellow Americans from 1966 to 1969. Garwood pleaded insanity. Either way, I was a good plea. The judge dismissed most charges, but in 1981, Garwood was found guilty of collaboration and assault. There's a book, Conversation with the Enemy, the story of Private PFC Robert Garwood by Winston Groom and Duncan Spencer. You might want to get that and read it. He was the only American POW convicted for his conduct in captivity while in Vietnam or as a collaborator. Now, he was not the only one charged. He was not the only one that was known to have collaborated and worked with the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong, but he was the only one charged. Now, how do you know when a deserter is a deserter? You know, just thinking about it, that ought to be fairly easy. But then when you know how the system works, it ain't all that easy. How do you know if a person is MIA or missing in action or deserter or not? How do you know if a person is a POW or deserter? Because the communists didn't come back out and give you the list of names and so forth that they had in prisoners. So how do you know if he was missing in action or if he was a POW? You didn't. How do you know if he was a deserter or a MIA or POW or whatever reason he was a deserter? It got to be a challenge for the military, okay? Deserters among the missing. One of the many enduring questions that surrounds the MIA issue is that of deserters and their presence on the list of the missing from Vietnam. In my view, this goes back to the article from the other gentleman who did Laldy. In my view, the fundamental questions are, how many of the men are listed as missing in action in reality are deserters? Should they be considered as MIA the same as the men who were lost in battle? In other words, like Garwood, 10 days left, who disappeared. Should he be listed as MIA or is he listed as a deserter? How do we know if they are still alive or hiding out someplace? I recently did a story about the Vietnamese guy who had been lost or hiding in the jungles of Vietnam for the last 40-some years or 50-some years now. Philip Giraldi is a recognized authority on international security and counterterrorism issues. This is the one who made the statement there when he was trying to figure out how there were deserters or not, okay? The first two questions are policy matters, bordering philosophical, and I will not attempt a response. The final question is easy enough to answer, and here's my answer. Over the years, a small number of deserters who were listed among the missing have popped up in various places and returned to the United States. And that's some of the American POWs that were captured. To understand how we encountered with our deserters, the problems, you first need to understand how the military service accounted for people. As most of you know, you served a year in Vietnam and you were assigned to another unit unless you got out of the service. Now, if you're getting out of the service, you probably won't want to desert. But if you were assigned to another unit, it may be that you were transferred there in Vietnam. Every military member must be accounted for by either present for duty when you stand for formation or whatever, the sergeant, whoever in charge says all present accounted for, sir, and salutes and so forth. That means that he counted all the people and all the right numbers there. He may not got the names, but the right numbers are there. But you have to be sick, or you have to be there for duty, sick or not on duty, temporarily separated from his or her unit for training or some other special requirements. In other words, sometimes if you were in Vietnam and they wanted you to carry a radio, they may send you someplace to teach or go to a radio school, or if you're going to be a machine gunner, or most of the time it was OJ. You could be en route to another unit, on leave or pass. In other words, some people got a chance to come home. If you re-up, you could come home for 30 days. You could be in a prisoner of war, prisoner of the United States military. You could be in a Long Binh, incarcerated in civilian prison. You might have come home and all of a sudden you got picked up and now you're in jail in the United States. Or you went to R&R and you're in Bangkok or somewhere and you're in jail. Are you deserted there because you're in jail? Well, I'm not quite certain that would be. So you either AWOL or you unauthorized absence. But then again, if you don't show up, you could be a deserter, but how do you know whether you're a deserter or not? Or how does the military know? See, when you're assigned and you're given an assignment to go someplace, when an individual leaves one unit with orders to report to another unit, there must be a date when accountability shifts from the losing unit to the gaining unit. In other words, if you're supposed to be there on the 10th of May, you better be there before 12 o'clock. Okay, we have a call. Good.
Hey, hello.
Hello.
Hey, my name is Joseph, and I just had like a question or something.
Okay, go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, how long are the deployments when back in Vietnam?
Well, if you were in the Army, Air Force, you were there 12 months generally. The Marines were there 13 months. Some people could extend over and over again. If they were, it could be for whatever reason, they could extend for, they had some early outs. So you could be extended for 2-3 months. And so that when you went home, they'd let you out of the service. But the standard time in country was 12 months for most troops.
Would you get more like days on R&R if you are extended more?
Yes, sir. In fact, if you extended, sometimes people would actually give 30 days at home if they extended. I'm not certain if I came home, I'd have made it back, but you could get more time at home, or you could get in-country R&R. I mentioned a while ago Vung Tau. Vung Tau was a beautiful beach on the coast, and they had in-country R&R there. So some people got 2 and 3 R&Rs. Some of them got to R&Rs to Bangkok, Hong Kong. A few people got 2 there. Most people got 1 and maybe 1 in country, like in Vung Tau.
Yeah, because I remember I took a class called Lessons of Vietnam at Cary High School with Mr. Page.
Yes, sir.
And we had a guest speaker who talked about R&R.
I saw Mr. Page this past weekend, to be exact. And I will be there at Cary High School next Monday.
Next Monday?
Yes, y'all going to be meeting in the library probably, and we're going to be speaking there.
Oh yeah, I made questions and everything. Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Yeah, well, thank you for your time, sir.
Well, I appreciate you calling in. I hope I get the answers you did, and tell Russell Page I said hello. And by the way, his wife is a higher rank than he is. He was a captain, and she's a major. So be sure and point that out to him.
I know.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay, move on. Now, reassignments and orders, you were told to be there, and you better show up to the sergeant there sitting there at that desk with your duffel bag, shoes shined, ready to go. Because if you were late, you could get all kinds of interesting details and so forth. So that's would be absent without leave or missing a movement or whatever. Okay. Now, an individual, you can see I got the guy's face walked out. I got a picture of a soldier, and I didn't want anybody to come back and say thinking he'd been AWOL. So he represents all the soldiers in Vietnam, we'll say. If individual does not report on his reporting date, he is carried on the rolls of the gaining units as AWOL. In other words, if he was transferring from Vietnam back to, say, Fort Hood, Texas, and he didn't show up on his reporting date, then he's listed as AWOL. After 30 days, he is DFR, dropped from the rolls, and reported as a deserter. Drop from rolls is a manpower accounting practice that does two things. First, it allows the gaining unit, which is now short one person, to request a replacement from personnel channels. In other words, that guy didn't show up, they need somebody to fill that slot, so they ask for somebody else. The second, it allows legal action to be stated against the now deserter, which means they can go out and start looking for him because he deserted. Maybe. Some of the men carried as deserters have returned to the United States in the years after the war. To illustrate the complex factors that lie behind many of these MIA deserter cases, one of the approximately 40 deserters that the record indicates had deserted in Vietnam was Marine PFC Roger A. Sawar, and I'm going to pronounce it Sawar. I'm probably not even close, but that's what we're going to say, and he can call me and correct it if he likes. Here's his story. Not too long after arriving in country, Sawar was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor. In other words, he received the Bronze Star for being in combat, something he did outstanding in combat. He must have been a pretty solid rifleman. At some point, he returned home on emergency leave. It could have been a parent had died or was real sick, but Red Cross worked with him and brought him home. Okay. Now, while on emergency leave, he applied for a hardship discharge. Again, that could have been daddy died and he needed to stay home and take care of mom and the family and so forth. The Marine Corps permitted him to remain home while waiting a decision. In other words, he didn't have to go report back to Vietnam when his time was up while they were making a decision. And didn't say how long they waited. Eventually, the United States Marine Corps declined to approve the petition and mailed Seward a Newport call date and a reporting date to his unit in Vietnam. Okay. He never made his port call for onward shipment back to Vietnam. His unit in Vietnam reported him AWOL when he failed to show up on the designated reporting date, and 30 days later, he was dropped from roll. On about 15th of September 1967, from that day on, Seward was listed as having deserted from his unit in Vietnam. Approximately 25 years later, a guy named Johnson died while eating breakfast at his home in Los Angeles County, California. The autopsy showed the cause of death to be an aneurysm of the brain. The county coroner was required to notify Johnson's next of kin. However, Johnson left no record of his next of kin. Johnson's roommate had no information about a next of kin, but the roommate did recall that Johnson had said a few things that led the roommate to believe that he had been in the military and may have been a Vietnam veteran. The coroner sent Johnson's fingerprints to the FBI to see if they could find a record that might help him locate the next of kin. To the coroner and the United States Marine Corps' surprise, the prints belonged to Seward. He had never been promoted for duty. They couldn't find him for 25 years. Another one, Vito Baker. Now, I don't know if this is his wife or not. It was just Mama Son's picture I found. You can see she's missing a few teeth. She's probably been chewing a betel nut. But Vito Baker, a U.S. Army absented himself from his unit in Vietnam in October of 1972 and was dropped from roll. He was living with his common law Vietnamese wife and remained there after the United States withdrawal. In other words, we all came home and he stayed. And their consolidation that followed the takeover of the South in 1975, the communists started checking up and then carefully monitoring the activities of foreigners in Vietnam, especially those Americans. They were especially suspicious of Americans who they suspected of working for the CIA and stay behind, and of Chinese they would have suspected of being a potential fifth column in the event of Chinese designs on Vietnam, of which they always have. Okay. Bacon and his wife were arrested and released a couple of times. Then in 1976, communists deported foreigners in an effort to cleanse Vietnam of foreign elements. Baker was arrested and taken to Saigon, turned over to the Red Cross and sent to Thailand. You can see Thailand where there with Laos in between. He eventually returned to the United States in the 1980s. The DIA, which is the people who go out and look for remains and so forth, the DIA office had some contact with him about his experience while in Vietnam, 1973, 1975. Baker had no information on other Americans in Vietnam. Other than that, they left him alone. He deserted and got by. They just kind of ignored him. Now, this is one that when I was in Vietnam, there was always the rumors. And I tell you what, there's one thing that goes well in the military, rumors. Oh, you would not believe some of the rumors that go on. But this was a rumor that kept right on going. It's like if you went out, a rumor that was out there was if you went out and you went to see the bar girls and you caught a disease, you might not be able to come home. The thing called the Black Sif, they sent you out to an island because there was no penicillin, anything was going to do that, and you were going to sit there in that island until you rotted away and died. That was one of the rumors out there, and I haven't yet found anybody yet that would actually confirm or deny that. Another unsolved stories of the Vietnam War has to do with persistent reports of two Americans, one Caucasian and one dark complexion, nicknamed Salt and Pepper, were seen on many occasions operating with the North Vietnamese Communist forces in I Corps. Now, I Corps is the top part of South Vietnam. People kept seeing what looked like American soldiers with the Communist forces and so forth. Okay. Reports of Salt and Pepper spanned several years and are focused on a fairly small area of I Corps, and all reports are quite similar. The consistency of these reports is enough to convince U.S. intelligence that something was going on there. As you can see the man there in the bushes and so forth, it's hard to see if that's all you can see, whether he is, who he is and who he's with and so forth. The bottom line is that there were never any firm identification established of Salt and Pepper. I believe there's seen a lot of Vietnam veterans today still believe there were a Salt and Pepper. Most reports came from members of U.S. combat units who reported that in the midst of firefight, they observed a black guy and a white guy with the North Vietnamese military. Otherwise, reports seeing only the white guy and others are only the black guy. Sometimes they were in more places than two people could be. Reports consistently identified Salt as a white, 5'10", 6 feet tall, 5'10" to 6 feet tall, dark hair, medium to slender build. Pepper as African American or Hispanic, 5 feet 6 inches or so, black hair, medium build. So who were Salt and Pepper? Who could they have been? They could have been American deserters. They could have been in French colonial troops or legionnaires. They were and are still some of them there after the French withdrew from Vietnam. Could have been some third countries serving as observers or advisors like Russians, Cubans, and so forth. A lot of them were there. So they could not necessarily been Americans. It could have been Russian or Cuban, but we don't really know for certain. Seoul City. Another persistent story is of Seoul City. This was supposedly an area of Saigon, Sholan, where a lot of African-American servicemen, many of them deserters, lived. The Sholan section was the Chinese section of Saigon. When I first got to Vietnam in 67, it was not off limits, but after the Tet Offensive of 68, it was pretty much ruled off limits. You were not supposed to be there. So you could very easily get lost in there. especially if you just blended in and live with Vietnamese or whatever. The stories about Seoul City are all over the place, and some saying that the military police, United States and ARVN did not dare enter the area. Other stories tell of rampant drug dealings and usage, black marketing, and the like. We always heard the stories about the drug marketing going in there and so forth. Okay. The embassy knew there were Americans in Saigon in 1974 and 75. They suspected that some of them may have been deserters. As it became clear that the communists were amassing for a major attack on the South, the embassy began to advertise for Americans to report to the embassy for evacuation. This advertising was done through Vietnamese and English language broadcasts, newspapers, and through police and military channels. Now, when the real military was supposed to report to the embassy, they played White Christmas, but this was actually advertised before that time. Okay. As a result, there was a sporadic flow of people showing up at the embassy and being sent on to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines to sort out who they were. As the communist forces took over the Central Highlands and headed for Saigon, the flow increased and guys came out of the woodwork. There were estimated that about 300 to 350 Americans answered this call over a period of weeks and moved on to Clark Air Force Base. In other words, there were 300 to 350 deserters who were living in somewhere in Vietnam who got out before the fall. Okay. Now, this is another strange story. On November 9th, 1967, weeks from completing a 2-year hitch in the Army, McKinley Nolan disappeared from his 1st Infantry Division unit. Communist Viet Cong propaganda broadcasts and leaflets later featured him urging fellow black soldiers to lay down their weapons. The Army branded Nolan as one of the war's 2 confirmed defectors, but offered no explanation as to why he deserted or what happened to him. When he arrived in Vietnam in 1966, Nolan was happily married, the father of 2 young sons in America. He was a friendly, muscular guy who loved baseball and horses. He had a wife and 2 kids back in America. Okay, that is some of the propaganda pictures that was taken of him. Within months of going missing, he unexpectedly appeared in communist propaganda broadcasts in which he urged other black GIs to join him. For years after the war, wild tales of Nolan's fate abounded. Some stories reported that he settled somewhere along the Vietnamese-Cambodian border, while others advanced the theory that he migrated to Cuba. 1980s and the 1990s, many Americans searching the jungles of Southeast Asia for the remains of lost U.S. servicemen heard rumors of that the former infantryman was alive and living in the bush. McKinley Nolan is like Bigfoot. MIA tracker and journalist Richard Lennett has said, he's spotted everywhere. As recently as 2006, a Vietnam veteran visited the region on a humanitarian mission encountered a 60-year-old African-American who claimed to be from Washington, Texas. According to the newspaper, the stranger even said had served with the 1st Infantry Division and had reportedly expressed his wish to return home, but lamented that he was unable to do so. The mystery of Nolan's whereabouts was even the subject of a 2009 documentary film. So we don't know yet. Now, this is another of the strange stories. An American soldier found alive in Vietnam 44 years after being left behind. Filmmaker Michael Jorgensen alleged to have found Sgt Robertson, 76, living in a rural Vietnamese village, stooped with age, unable to speak English, remember his birthday or names of the children he left behind in the United States. A documentary called Unclaimed claims to introduce the world to former Army Sergeant Sgt Robertson, lost over Vietnam in 1968 and left behind for over 4 decades, and that's his picture there. Jorgensen said that he was also skeptical when a Vietnam vet came to him and explained that he'd found found in Vietnam was a former Army brother listed as killed in action and forgotten. Sergeant Robertson crashed over Laos in 1968 during a mission. The official United States government document showed that the Vietnamese man named Dong Tang Ngoc has been trying to impersonate him for years. Former Special Forces soldiers have come forward to pour scorn on his claim to be the former Green Beret. a documentary claiming to have found him, age 76, still living in Vietnam with a wife and children. So is he the real guy or not the real guy? This would have meant the man who claimed to be Sergeant John Hartley Robertson never contacted his American wife and 2 children who believed him dead for 44 years. Despite these new revelations, his sister, who is filmed being reunited with him in a documentary, said she knows it's him. She swears that it's him. That's his picture of the way he looks now at 76. But he has been deemed as a fraud by U.S. authorities. But nobody still knows for certain. Sabog Manteo. Manteo Sabog enlisted in the United States Army on 15th December 1945 at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. During his flawless 24-year military career, he had a variety of assignments. On 25th of February 1970, he completed his second tour of duty as a logistics sergeant with the 507th Transportation Group in Binh Dinh, South Vietnam. Remember, second tour. He out-processed from his unit with orders to a new assignment with headquarters and headquarters company, 12th Transportation Group, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And that's his picture there you saw. The Army presumed he departed Vietnam through Tan Son Nhut, which was the air base there in Saigon, which was located in the northwest edge of Saigon on a schedule. However, United States records indicate there is no evidence that Master Sergeant Sabog used his plane ticket or that his personal effects were claimed. According to an Army spokesman, unfortunately because of an administrative glitch, he was not missing by authorities at Fort Bragg since the post was not informed that Master Sergeant Sabog had orders to report there. In other words, Fort Bragg didn't know he was coming. It was not until 1973 when Sabog's family in Hawaii asked the United States to help locate him that the Department of Army finally realized that the career soldier was missing. All that period of time, they didn't know he was missing. In June 1974, the United States arbitrarily declared him a deserter. And he'd been missing all this time. They didn't know it. His brother asked where he was, and now they decided he was a deserter, okay? As a result of the inquiry from Sabog's brother, the United States Army convened a board of inquiry to review all available evidence and to determine the appropriate status of Master Sergeant Sabog. After evaluating all available materials, the board concluded that he did not absent himself voluntarily, and they should not be classified as a deserter. The board recommended that Sabog's status be changed immediately from deserting to missing, presumptive finding of death. This change was made retroactive, effective 26th of March 1970. Date he was supposed to report to Fort Bragg. Master Sergeant Sabog's family was notified that his recommendation was approved in December of 1979. Gets stranger. In July of 1973, the Pentagon office in charge of POW MIA affairs told the United States Army that Matog Sabog's name would be added to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial as having died in the war. On April 11th, 1955, 95, yes, 1995. When I said 18, then got a little bit. The same POW-MI office, the same people who said they were going to put him on the wall, and the Pentagon informed Matog Sabog's brothers that the Vietnamese government had indicated where the brothers' remains had been recovered. These remains included 22 teeth, 5 showing possible restorations, along with some bones. At the same time, the Vietnamese turned over some personal effects and clothing. Okay, so they found his buried. These remains and artifacts were shipped to the United States Army Central Identification Laboratory in Hawaii for examination. Dental analysis of the teeth was inconclusive. The Central Identification Laboratory in Hawaii did not come right out and positively identify these remains as belonging to Sabog. However, according to the United States government sources, they did indicate the bones might belong to Master Sergeant Sabog. The Army decided to conduct DNA analysis of these remains in an attempt to confirm the tentative identification. Ironically, Matog Sabog was discovered in northwestern Georgia before this could be accomplished. In late February 1966, Sabog used his correct name and social security number to apply for veterans benefits. When computer records indicated the application was being made to name a man who was officially classified as dead, Fingerprints were taken and compared to those maintained by the military. That examination confirmed that the man applying for benefits, Maytag Sabag, was one and the same, where he had been for the last 26 years. What is known for sure is Maytag Sabag went by the name of Bobby Fernandez for 10 years. Also in that time, he lived in Rossville, Georgia as a live-in caretaker companion for an elderly lady for a little more than room and board. And she passed away. According to other residents of Rossville, the man known as Bobby Fernandez believed he had served in Vietnam, but could not remember more than that. In 1993, about the same time as his name was being added to the Vietnam Memorial, he told the local police department that he thought he might be AWOL from the military, but knew no details that might support the beliefs. The police checked his information, made several calls, but told it was not possible because Maytag Sabag was dead. I mean, his name was on the wall. In early March 1956, 96, that second number is kidding me. Maytag Sabag was returned to active duty in order to be admitted to the Eisenhower Medical Center, Fort Gordon, Georgia, for a complete medical evaluation and to be given any necessary treatment. Subsequently, he was honorably retired from the United States Army. So they brought him back into the military so they could kick him out. Shortly thereafter, he returned to Hawaii to live. Sabag briefly became the oldest serving soldier on the return to his family. His only remarks was, "I'm sorry." He died in Hawaii in 2007. You might ask, why would a person desert in Vietnam? Well, this is some of the propaganda that the communists used to put out. Hey, Americans, this girl for $10,000, this girl and $10,000 in cash. You do not need to fight your own people. We just need your cooperation and learning your training. You can earn extra cash if you choose to assist in our training or intelligence programs. Live in comfort and safety in Europe or Asia. Maybe that's why some of them left the military and so forth. Thank you again for watching our show tonight. I hope you enjoyed it and got some value out of it. And I know it kind of gets crazy sometimes between treason and sedition and so forth. If you wish to see the show again or recommend it to somebody, just go online to www.nissancommunications.com live and click on demand and look for Demons and Deserters and others. Our next show will be same time, same channel at 8 o'clock, May 23rd, and it'll be talking about Memorial Day. Again, thank you very much for tuning in and looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks for our next show. And if you're out there with the, I'll be at Cary High School next Monday all day for a panel discussion to several different classes. So if you're in the Cary area, Cary High School, come in and see us. Again, thank you and have a good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.